what's that word? Excerpt. I've been practicing that all morning because I tend to say expert, and I know that's not right. Excerpt of this book, this commentary by Roy Zuck on Job, and I want to maybe read the first page of this just to kind of get our minds on this. So, why did this happen to me? We've all thought of that. Over the centuries, people have cried that question while agonizing in pain, weeping from grief, languishing over loss. Emergency major surgery, a protracted terminal illness, a sudden loss of possessions by fire, flood, or earthquake, premature death of a child, a divorce, a wayward teen, a son killed in war, a teen critically injured in a car accident, a child born with brain damage, a setback in business. These are some of the many adversities and heartaches shared by the human race. Now, you need to understand that all of these calamities affect sinner and saint alike. There's no line drawn that it only happens to a certain group of people. Okay, and I think we all understand that. If we could see direct relationships between our sufferings and sins in our lives, connections between our tragedies and our transgressions, we could more readily comprehend the ways or the whys of our troubles. But usually, problems intrude without explanations. And when we cannot relate our woes directly to some known acts of sin, we conclude that the afflictions are undeserved. We've all felt that at times, haven't we? What have I done to deserve this? The wail, what did I do to deserve this, reveals a sense of injustice, a feeling that the problems exceed what we rightfully deserve. Perhaps the most intense example of this undeserved suffering is recorded in the book of Job, which we're getting ready to study. In a matter of minutes, Job, a wealthy and godly man, lost all of his material possessions, all of his children, and his health. Then, adding anguish upon anguish, his friends accused him rather than consoling him. Furthermore, God, from all appearances, was intentionally absenting himself from Job's problems, refusing to hear and rise to his cause. Yet, Job was blameless, upright, fearing God, and turning away from evil. Could any tragedy be any more unmerited? Should not a godly person be blessed and not badgered by God? Throughout the ages, a strange magnetism about the book of Job has pulled people to its pages. Certainly, many individuals have discovered a degree of solace by identifying with Job, whose distresses were agonizingly prolonged, manifestly unfair, as it is all suffering for righteousness' sake and unbelievably intense. This book's subject, unjust human suffering, makes it an appealing book. Job addresses itself to the global puzzle of suffering, the universal mystery, and misery unmerited. So when we go through this book, I want us to understand that there is and we'll see this in chapter 1, a unseen cosmic, I'm going to say battle, but that's not really a battle. It's not a battle. There's an unseen realm that goes on that we have no idea about. We're going to get a picture of that here in the first chapter of Job, but understand that the things that are going to happen to Job are happening because God has allowed it to happen. Now, we will see the purpose of that as we go through the book, but understand that all of this stuff is things that happened to Job because God allowed it to happen. And we may not agree or we may not understand, but hopefully going through this book will help us to understand what actually goes on perhaps in this unseen realm that we don't maybe perhaps even can't comprehend. So anyway, a few other things. I got a lot highlighted here. I'm not going to read everything here, but just kind of. Job is different in the fact that it's narrative and it's also poetry. Now, not poetry in the fact that it rhymes, but it uses metaphors, it uses pictures to describe actions, or it uses various forms of literature or writing to paint a picture, so to speak. Not necessarily just a narrative like we've been reading, say, for instance, through the book of Nehemiah. That's all narrative. That's just stuff that's happened and has been written down in history. But Job, on the other hand, is narrative, but it's also what they call poetry and prose, Prose. So you can look that up on your own time if you want. But this is how the book of Job is different from many of the other books because of the way it's written in its literary style. From there, I don't think we need to read all that. All right, many people think that perhaps Job wrote the book, but then there is a course of thought that Moses wrote the book. It is pretty much, I'll say, agreed upon that Job was a contemporary of perhaps Abraham. It was after the flood, and we see that it was after the flood because Job talks about the flood in the Bible or in his book. He also talks about burnt offerings, which was technically that was prescribed in the law, but that was also something that people that feared God did apart from the law. And we'll see that after Noah come off the ark. First thing he did was sacrifice. Abraham sacrificed. And so this burnt offering of sacrifice was something that was done by godly people even without there being a law. Job never mentions the book of Moses or the law or the wanderings or any of that would perhaps be mentioned in a book that would have happened after the wanderings. And so many people believe that Job was perhaps either before or during the time of Abraham. Job lived to be about 200 years, which after Moses, there was nobody that is recorded in Scripture that lived to be 120. And the time frame of the longevity of men right after the flood was in that 200-year time frame. And so many people believe that that Job took place soon, sometime after the flood, but before, perhaps before Abraham was chosen to be what he was for the Lord. But so that kind of gives us some type of time frame about when the book was written. So it would be in the Genesis time frame, perhaps in the middle of the book of Genesis. All right. Anybody got any questions before we really get going here, tooth and toenail? Yeah, and that would really much align with right after the flood. Now, I'm just under the impression that Job wrote this partly because that's what I've always believed. But I can't say that for certainty that Job actually was the one that penned this. But, well, yeah, he probably lost his pen. But he got it back. Yes, he got back 10 times more pens. But nevertheless, I'm of the impression myself, my thinking, that he wrote it. So if I say that Job wrote it, take that for a grain of salt. But I'll probably be referring to that from time to time that he wrote it. Let's see, what else? I got that. Some people believe that the man Job, J-O-B-A-B, that's mentioned in Genesis 10:29, is the Job from the book Job. Now, I saw that mentioned in a few commentaries, but I can't say that was fully agreed upon by all commentators I read. But just to kind of give you a picture there. He was from the land of Uz, which was in northern Saudi Arabia, just what would be in our vernacular, just east of the country of Jordan, in a fertile area in northern Saudi Arabia, what we would call that today. That was roughly the area of Uz, U-Z. Let's see what else. I guess that's about it for the introduction. So hopefully that kind of gives us an understanding of where we're at and what the book of Job is about here. Something you might want to write down somewhere or just kind of keep a mental note. I'm going to read these verses, but these will be kind of give us a better picture of what happens to Job here if we understand these verses here. Genesis 50:20. Joseph tells his brothers, "But as for you, ye thought it evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring it to pass, as it is this day, to save much people alive." And we all understand what he's referring to there, him being sold into slavery. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. And the same thing is going to happen for us in the book of Job. We're going to see this evil calamity come upon Job, but through it all, good comes out of it. And one thing that's good out of it is that we here today in 2026 are going to learn about Job and his patience and perseverance through adversity, so that will help us when the time comes for us, because we're all going to go through something at some point in our life. And then I want to read Romans 8:28, which we're all familiar with, or should be, or probably have been. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. All things work together for good. And so in some way, your calamity works towards good for something. Now again, we may not understand that, but we will in the by and by when we get into eternity. All right, with that being said, I think I'm ready to start. And how did I end up in the book of Exodus? Oh, I was in Genesis. That's what. Okay. Job. So chapter 1, verse 1, it does tell us who he is and that he was from the land of Uz. We talked about that. And before we get started, I will say that Job was considered to be a perfect, upright, and one that feared God and eschewed or avoided evil. That's not to say he was without sin, but to the people that he dealt with, he was an honorable, righteous man. He had no bad name against him. That's what this is meaning when we read here in verse 1. And it lists here in verse 3, which I'm giving the commentary before we start reading, all of this great wealth that he had, 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels. One commentator said he was kind of like in the trucking business and in the farm implement business with all the sheep and the camels and the oxen, that he was in the farming and the trucking business. So because the camels would be used for long distance hauling and stuff. So I thought that was kind of funny. So anyway, what's that? Okay. Thanks, Terry. Job 1:1.
The book of Job, chapter 1. There was a man in the land of Uz, whose name was Job, and that man was perfect and upright, and one that feared God, and eschewed evil. And there were born unto him 7 sons and 3 daughters. His substance also was 7,000 sheep, and 3,000 camels, and 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 she-asses, and a very great household, so that this man was the greatest of all the men of the East.
Now that's saying something. He was the greatest of all the men in the East. Now keep in mind, Abraham came from that area. He was a little further east. So perhaps, in some ways, Abraham had already been called and had moved to Canaan. I'm just throwing that out there as a possibility. Just understand that Job had a good name, and he was a good man. And many people thought highly of Job. And so we can't really point and say, well, because he did X, Y, and Z, he deserved what he got. And I think the first few verses here are showing us that there was nothing in Job's life that should have caused all of this to happen because of some sin in his life. Okay? But he's of the greatest men of the East. That's saying something. He did have 7 sons and 3 daughters, 10 children. And we see here in verse 4.
And his sons went and feasted in their houses, every one his day, and sent and called for their 3 sisters to eat and to drink with them. And it was so, when the days of their feasting were gone about, that Job sent and sanctified them, and rose up early in the morning, and offered burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, It may be that my sons have sinned, and cursed God in their hearts. Thus did Job continually.
Now this would be liking to us praying for our families, that they would stay close to God, or if they're far from the Lord, that they would cleave to God, that type of thing. But Job is offering burnt offerings here, again, apart from the law. And so we do see here that he was a godly man, because this was something that was practiced by God-fearing people in the book of Genesis before the law came. But we see here that his sons and his daughters, they gather together, they feast, they're a close-knit family. Some believe that this talking about on his day was meaning that they would celebrate birthdays, and they would all come together on birthdays. I can't say for sure if that's 100% what that means, but it does show us that they were a close-knit family and came together on certain days to have a feast. And it wasn't just a drunken revelry because they're inviting their sisters, but this is a family gathering. And Job, it says there, in the days of their feasting, when they're doing this, he's out praying for them and offering these burnt offerings and holding up his family to the Lord. So we get a good picture here of what Job is and his family. And now we come to a scene in heaven, verse 6.
Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them.
Keep in mind, these sons of God here are angels. They are coming before the Lord. And notice what it says, Satan came also among them. So we have this big host of angels in front of the Lord and his throne, and in amongst them is Satan. Now, we may not understand this. We may not have even thought about Satan being in front of the throne of God. But Scripture does tell us in the book of Revelation and other places that Satan is the accuser of the brethren. And he stands before God, pointing out the sins of God's people. But God will, God tells him they're covered, which we're not going to chase all that down. But understand that here's Satan in front of God amongst this host of angels. And God allows Satan to speak here in verse 7.
And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. And the Lord said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man, one that feareth God, and escheweth evil?
So God asked Satan, what you doing? He said, I'm just coming to and fro. I'm going back and forth, which, nothing occurs to God. God knew what Satan was up to. But we see here this conversation. Notice verse 8. God says to Satan, have you thought about my servant Job? Now, this shows us a couple of things. First of all, God knows his children by name. Now, we could say that in that day, perhaps there wasn't many children of God, but we understand the concept here. He knew Job by name and knew that he was a righteous man. That should be something for us to consider. If God knows Job's name, surely he knows my name. And surely he knows that I'm righteous, that I'm one of his. Now, the book of 1 Timothy tells us that the Lord knows those that are his. But he knows Job by name and calls him by name. Now, I hope one of these days that God doesn't look to Satan and say, have you considered Jim down there? But nevertheless, God points out the fact that here is Job. He is a perfect and upright man. He fears me and he eschews or avoids evil. God's pointing out Job to Satan. Keep in mind, Satan is not omnipresent. He doesn't know, he can't be everywhere at once like God is. He isn't omnipotent where he knows everything. And he's not strong to where like God is, that he's able to do things without the Lord allowing it. And so he points out to Job, have you considered Job? Now, apparently the answer in verse 9 indicates that Satan did know Job, because here's what Satan says in verse 9.
Then Satan answered the Lord, and said, Doth Job fear God for naught? Hast not thou made an hedge about him, and about his house, and about all that he hath on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. But put forth thine hand now, and touch all that he hath, and he will curse thee to thy face.
So here's Satan answering back. Apparently Satan is aware of Job, and goes on to describe, well, why wouldn't Job serve you? Look at all this stuff that you've given him. You've made a hedge about him. We've heard this prayer, perhaps, this hedge of protection. Well, I think that's where this comes from. But you've put a hedge around Job. He's protected. You've blessed him. Everything he touches turns to gold, so to speak. No wonder he serves you. And Satan tells God in verse 11, put forth thy hand now and touch all that he has, and he will curse thee to thy face. I want us to turn to Revelation chapter 12. Revelation chapter 12. Well, I'll turn this. I will say, Satan is not omnipresent, but he does have many demons at work that do his bidding. So while we perhaps aren't affected by Satan personally, we can be affected by the demons that go about. But Revelation chapter 12, verse 10, this is the prophecy concerning Satan, but also a statement about him. And it says, and I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now is come salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. So we see here, this is talking about Satan, when he finally is going to be cast down, when he's actually going to be judged and banished. And it says there, he's the accuser of the brethren before God, day and night. And so when we go back here to Job chapter 1, verse 11, Job is looking at God in the face and saying, you take your hand off Job, Satan is looking to God in the face and accusing him, if you take your hand off Job, he will curse you to his face. Now, one thing about Satan, he's a liar. But Satan thinks that if God takes his protection off Job, that Job will curse him. But you know what? God knows that he won't. And so, the games begin. God is going to allow Satan to buffet Job to prove through the devil and his demons that Job's righteousness was not a righteousness in and of himself, but the righteousness of God. And God knows that Job is not going to curse him because God knows that Job belongs to him. And in much the same way, those of us today that are buffeted by Satan's attacks or whatever, perhaps in some way, it's a cosmic game back and forth. God proving to Satan and to ourselves that we are truly belonging to the Lord because we don't curse him when bad things come. Now, there are people that do, and I think that shows the pretenders, those that say they're saved or say that they love God, but the minute some type of adversity comes, they shake their fist at God and quit. And that happens often. But there's also a group of people that seemingly no matter what comes their way, they're praising the Lord, they're seeking the Lord, they're praying, they're giving glory to God, and seeking the Lord's help in the adversities that come their way. So you got I was going to say the tenders and the pretenders, but that doesn't work. So you know what I mean. But God has full assurance and confidence that Job will not curse him in these days that are coming. And I hope that we all can think the same thing, that when the time comes, we won't curse God. And God knows whether you will or not. God knows who truly belongs to him. Everybody doing okay so far?
So, if you go back, like what exactly started this? Because Satan didn't ask God a question about tempting anyone.
This was all God.
Throw him under the bus.
Yes. Well, I mean,
I guess I've never thought about that part of it. It's like God just said.
Yeah, God was the one that brought it up.
Satan didn't want to do. Okay.
Yeah, Satan. It wasn't Satan's idea to attack Job. It was God pointing out Job to Satan. Now again, this may be something that we haven't ever thought about or can't comprehend, but the plain reading of Scripture is that it's God that is allowing Job to do these things, and we're going to learn more about that as we go through the rest of this chapter, that God gives Satan some power that he didn't previously have in order to buffet Job. Now again, just because something bad happens to you doesn't necessarily mean that God has turned you over to Satan to prove, because bad things happen to good people all the time. And I think the book of Luke tells us that it rains on the just and the unjust alike. Things happen to people regardless of their status with Christ. But put forth thine hand now and touch all that he hath, and he will curse thee to thy face. Well, it's funny you say that, because after I heard it read out loud this time, I perhaps wonder, well, I think it's Satan, because the last line. Yeah, he will curse. Yeah. So when I first heard it, I was 100% that Satan. But then when I heard it just now, I thought, well, is that God? And then, but the last sentence or the last phrase of that sentence tells us that it's Satan that's talking there.
If you were someone who wasn't that familiar with God and what God can do, you would think that God is using Job for a ping pong ball, just to play with him.
Well, we can tend to think that, but we also need to understand there's a greater work going on outside of the worldly realm, and this is going to be part and parcel of that, to show that God knows who belongs to him, that Satan is a liar, and that Job's faith grows stronger through the calamity. It's not based on all the blessings that God has given Job, but Job's faith is based on who he's got his faith in, not on his stuff. And this, again, I call it a cosmic game, is to prove to us, to Job, and to Satan that God's righteousness will stay. And that those that really truly belong to God will stay no matter what.
devil and his schemes at this time? Because it says this is like one of the oldest books.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which you said he knew of the flood, but I didn't know if they knew. Because would they have known what happened in the Garden of Eden? Because they wouldn't have necessarily had a scripture at this time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, I think those that came after the flood were handed down the reason why the flood came, and that was because of sin and separation from God. I'm guessing here. And so perhaps in some way, because Job had to know about the burnt offerings that were given from his ancestors. And so in some ways, I believe that Job had been taught that there is a God and there is evil in the world. But I can't necessarily answer that with a verse to point to.
Do you think that this is prior to Satan being thrown out of heaven? Just the way verse 6 reads?
That wasn't a question I was prepared for.
I'm sorry.
No, because Satan goes back and forth regardless. Well, we see here in the book of Revelation, he stands before God day and night accusing the brethren. So, to me, that says that whether it was before or after, he still stands before God accusing us.
Yeah.
And we also see that he will be kicked out of heaven. In the book of Revelation, we see that. Well, that was in, I think, that verse in chapter 12 we read, that he was kicked out of heaven then. Yeah. 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 But God allows it. Yeah. Which we'll talk about that as we start going through the next section here about what God's allowing here. But I see your point, but I think when we read Revelation, we also see that Satan is in heaven then. But whether this actually happened before, I would say he was already kicked out, because there are some commentators that believe that Satan was kicked out before the creation, but we don't really have any scripture for that I know of. So, anyway.
Well, when it says, was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them.
Yeah.
So does that among them mean that he is one of them, or does that just mean
I think verse 7.
He crashed the party.
Yeah, verse 7, I think, the Lord asked Satan, where'd you come from, basically? So not that it surprised God, but just,
right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a good thought. And again, there's going to be a lot of questions brought up because we don't typically think about God allowing this to happen. But so anyway, let's go to verse 12. Understanding all of this, that God controls all and knows all. R.C. Sproul would say there's no maverick molecule in creation. Everything is doing what it's designed to do. There's nothing doing it on its own. And so everything that happens is because it's in the control of the Lord. And we have a hard time understanding that, but that's what we are seeing here. More on that in just a minute here, but let's look at verse 12.
And the Lord said unto Satan, Behold, all that he hath is in thy power. Only upon himself put not forth thine hand. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord.
So God tells Satan here, all that he has is in your power. Now we're going to see some things coming upon Job that can only be done by the hand of God, but God is allowing Satan some power that he doesn't normally have, which we'll talk about that in a minute. And so, take all you want. Let's see here. Only upon himself put forth not thine hand. So you can't touch Job himself. So, Satan went and got busy here. Verse 13.
And there was a day when his sons and his daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. And there came a messenger unto Job, and said, The oxen were plowing, and the asses feeding beside them. And the Sabaeans fell upon them, and took them away. Yea, they have slain the servants with the edge of the sword. And I only am escaped alone to tell thee.
How did he pronounce that? Sabians? Sabine? Anyway, that was a group of people that basically in this day and age, or in that day and age, were marauders. They were robbers, and they were a well-known gang, perhaps it would be our vernacular today. And apparently they came and they killed the oxen and the asses. They killed the servants except for one. Okay? All but one are killed, and I've came to tell you. Verse 15 there. Verse 16.
While he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, The fire of God is fallen from heaven, and hath burned up the sheep and the servants, and consumed them, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee.
Now there's some debate as what this fire from heaven is. I believe it's lightning. But notice here that, again, God is allowing Satan to do this. And so in some ways, many commentators believe that God gave Satan control of the weather at this moment to bring calamity upon Job and his sheep and his servants here in verse 16. And only one escaped. Now we may think that this is just a made-up story, because how can all this happen at once? We need to understand that Satan is ready to pounce. And so once God gives him permission, Satan gets busy. He doesn't take time to plan. He just gets busy. And so we see here in verse 15, or verse 14 and 15, all the things that happened, and one servant was alone to escape and tell. In verse 16, the same thing happened, only this time it was fire and not just robbers and marauders. But fire of God, again, I believe that's lightning. And we see here, while he's speaking, verse 17.
While he was yet speaking, there came also another, and said, The Chaldeans made out 3 bands, and fell upon the camels, and have carried them away, yea, and slain the servants with the edge of the sword. And I only have escaped alone to tell thee.
Now these would be people from the area of Babylon have come over, and they've broke up into 3 different groups and have taken all the camels and carried them away and slain the servants besides one. So we have 3 servants alive. They're going to lose their job because they're not going to have anything to take care of here after a bit. But all this calamity is coming one right after another. We don't see any time gap of days or weeks or months or whatever. This is one thing after another is happening all at once. Verse 18.
While he was yet speaking, there came also another, and said, Thy sons and thy daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. And behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness, and smote the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young men, and they are dead. And I only am escaped alone to tell thee. Then Job arose, and rent his mantle, and shaved his head, and fell down upon the ground, and worshipped, and said, Naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly.
So all this is lost. Job arose and tore his mantle, which again was a sign of anguish, shaved his head, which again in those days was a sign of anguish. And what did he do? He fell down on the ground and worshipped, because he understood at this point, I still have the Lord. Naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. Everything that God has given us, or everything that we have, God has given us. I hope we all understand that. And if God has given it to us, he expects us to manage it well, but also he can take it away from us. Now the Lord is kind and gracious, and he doesn't. But as we will see at the end of the book, that Job gets back double what he lost. Now we can't say that having twice as many children is an offset for losing his other children. We can't say that. But in the grand picture, I think he got back the same amount of kids, didn't he? Yeah, he got back the same amount of kids. But just because you got 7 or 10 kids, new kids, doesn't take away the loss of the old. I think we understand, though, that Job's attitude was, the Lord can do what he wants, and the Lord's doing it to me. And it says there, the Lord gives, the Lord takes away. You guys remember at Joe's back behind his cash register, he said, the Lord giveth and the government taketh away. You all remember seeing that little sign behind? I always thought of that first when I'd go check out at Joe's. I don't know if I was just there Friday. I don't remember if that was still there or not. Anyway, don't matter. In all this, Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. He didn't look up and shake his fist at God, didn't turn from God. As we will see through the rest of the book, Job is not going to turn from the Lord either. Because next week, he's going to start having health problems, which we will read about that next week. Anybody got any comments or questions?